So help me welcome, please, the directors of the Croods, Chris Sanders. Kirk DeMicco. And you know him, you love him, Nicolas Cage.
One Hour with Elvis, the 2014 version.
Well, I can live on that. Let me ask you guys this, because one of the things I was telling you I love so much about this movie, besides the fact that it keeps all three of those sort of separate disciplines that sometimes animation films lose sight of, I mean, the idea of keeping story, character, and humor going, is still there's this great anarchic streak that reminds me of 30s Warner Brothers cartoons. I mean, that really spoke to me. They won't tell anybody, I promise. Talk a little bit about bringing that to the film.
You know, I've worked on so many different animated movies, and they're surprisingly serious, really. It's a big deal and very serious. And this is the first time I think we ever had that sort of chance to open up that kind of silly, broad action. You know, we could finally, I actually sat down and storyboarded all the Croods on the tusks of a mammoth with their feet, their bare feet in the ground, trying to stop the mammoth from running. And I thought, this is something I've always wanted to do, this kind of thing. And that's why just doing the Caveman film was so exciting, because we had this whole list of things in the very beginning. We thought, we don't want to disappoint anybody who's going to come in and see this movie that wants to see Caveman. We don't want something that's too serious up front, so we had all these things like
the universal caveman expectations.
And the list was like lava and giant rocks rolling on people and like guys hitting their heads and mammoths running around. And so we were like, check, make sure you hit all those things. So yeah, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to get all that stuff in.
But I mean, one of the great notes that I just always go back to, and one of the reasons I want to program this is that they make such a big presence, even as they're going through the jungle creatures are hiding from them. I mean, you can see why they're starving, because even the bat tries to cover its ears and crashes into something. That's such a great motif. I mean, Kirk talked a little bit about that too.
Well, the creatures, the fun thing about the creatures were, you know, in a movie like this, we had an opportunity to do anything we wanted to. It was a completely wide open slate. The film was created completely 100% by all the imaginations of the artists at DreamWorks, because there was no place to start. We had a world that we were building, creatures we could build, and people we could build. And the fun thing about the creatures were we figured out a way to make these sort of evolutionary dead ends, these creatures that weren't going to make it, but they were sort of mixes of creatures you might recognize, which was fun, you know, for the kids to like watch, but also it gave us an opportunity to really put a spin on some creatures that during the course of production we would sit there and somebody would run in and go like, did you see they just dug up a half dog, half crow? We'd be like, yes. So they'd constantly be doing stuff, and we actually took a lot of trips here to the tar pits. And yeah, so it was really fun just to build the creatures, knowing where we were going with the characters and to make them as weird as we possibly could, so you would understand why Grug was freaking out, because he would be in the same place as the audience.
And Nick, tell me about the first time you talked to these guys, because one of the things you're so good at doing is calibrating size. And tell me about how you sort of figure out how big to make this character, because you can go sometimes really big but nuanced.
Well, I mean, it's all about style, and I'm one of those performers that doesn't like to put a limit on things. I want to be able to, what I call, go outside the box. And fortunately for me, I got to work with Chris and Kirk, and they're not afraid of that. In fact, they're very encouraging about that, and they're good actors in their own right. So I would do dialogue with them, and they would start cracking up, and that just encouraged me even more to do it. But you mentioned slapstick earlier, and you know, I'm one of those people that actually find slapstick really funny. I grew up watching Jerry Lewis. I love Jerry Lewis. He's one of the only people that makes me laugh. And then Daffy Duck. But when I come to think of it, Daffy Duck and Jerry Lewis are almost like the same person, or entity, I guess I should call it.
Yeah,
so I should say Jerry Lewis and Mel Blanc.
And
yeah. Yes. But so to be able to have fun with this part and to be slapstick and to play with that, to me, was like a return to vaudeville in some way.
But I also, you talk about style, but again, I always think of you in terms of degrees and calibration, that you really do the way, you talk about slapstick, the way with Oliver Hardy, everything is worked out in scale to the screen. Talk about sort of figuring out the size of...
Well, the thing is, it is worked out. There is design, but when you also work with directors you trust, you allow yourself as a performer to go for it, because they will use and they will find specifically the right amount to use for a given scene. But I am of the opinion that you can be as big, so-called, as you want, as long as there's emotional content within it. It has to be honest. It has to be emotionally connected. So if you want to get operatic, if you want to get Baroque, if you want to get slapstick, great, but fill it with something where there really is some heart, where there really is some feeling. And the Croods has that throughout the film. It's wonderfully funny, but at the same time, I can't watch this movie and not get a little verklempt. I mean, I look at the scene with the hug when Grug, the only thing he does get to invent in this whole world is the hug, and that's a pretty good thing to invent. I can't help but get a little misty-eyed.
I'm glad you could share that with people after Thanksgiving, Nick. But what I like about the movie, when you talk about that emotion content, is that there's that sense of family. And just watching, I was thinking, again, this would be a great movie to show up to Thanksgiving in that way that family can drive you crazy, that they all drive each other crazy, but they're all connected to each other, which is something movies with families never get right, that sort of kind of irritation that can create a pearl or a fist fight. And that's a constant. And I just wonder how you guys were able to manufacture that with the actors and also find the visual correlative for that.
Man, every Christmas, it wasn't Christmas in my house until somebody was crying, until my sister had run upstairs and slammed the door. It would always get to that point. It's like, bam, that's Christmas. I think we just channeled a lot of the stuff that we grew up with, and then tried to, I think the interesting thing about this movie was to keep every character alive and engaged in every scene, because in a lot of films, and actually every other film I've ever worked on, you can isolate characters and then just have these really in-depth, intense scenes just between these two characters. But this one, everyone was there all the time. There was no place else for anyone to go during the course of the film. And we would rehearse scenes before we would hand them out to the animators, with the animators in a room, trying to figure out where everybody was even standing around. Like a scene in a cave, there's a lot of characters that you don't want to lose track of and stuff. So I think it started with just trying to get everybody, keep everybody alive in a scene all at once.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is unique to the caveman, motif was that you strip away, police, society. There's no one to call, firemen.
No jobs.
Yeah. There's nothing, no school. There's nothing else to worry about but your family and the people around you. And then so that's where the big questions start to come in, which was like, why are we here? Why are we doing this? And that's what really surprised us when we started, was just thinking, oh, this is gonna be a lot of fun. But when it gets down to it, you're really talking about some big questions and what makes a family, special, and why we're in families, why we're doing this is what Eve's big question is.
And let me bring this back to you, Nick, because I've been thinking, just to get ready for this and watching stuff, and for the last 5 years, you've been playing a lot of dads and shading them in such different ways, but there's such this sort of sense of kind of constant sort of paternal authority and fear, which is such an unusual mix for a character.
Well, I think, I'm going to be 50 January 7th, so it makes sense that I'm playing dads. Thank you. A father is a library of emotions. I mean, you go through everything as a father, so it's a wonderful character to play, because you tap into feelings of unconditional love, and you tap into feelings of fear for your kids and being overprotective. And being a father in my own life, I had plenty to draw from, so I could get to that emotional content that we were talking about earlier. So I enjoy playing fathers, and I don't shy away from it. I don't shy away from getting older. I like the idea of getting older. I hope I'll keep playing fathers and then grandfathers and then great-grandfathers. It's interesting to me.
I just sort of think, too, is often there's a very kind of singular coloration for dads in animated films. They're one thing or the other, and have these things basically in conflict in almost every scene. I thought was a really interesting nuance to play.
Yeah, I mean, an overprotective father by nature is not someone that people genuinely want to look at. It's kind of a drag, but it's also funny. I mean, there's plenty of stuff you can do with that kind of guy to get laughs, and so Grug gave me that chance, and they sure guided me in that direction. So I ultimately enjoyed it. But I have to say, Grug and I are very different people. I believe not to live in fear, within reason. I believe if there's something you're afraid of, within reason, that's the very thing you should go towards and get control of it and slay the dragon, if you will. Grug is completely the other way. However, he goes through a catharsis. And that's, anytime you have a character that has a through line, a character that evolves, the audience goes with you and they go on that journey with you. Maybe you go home and you go, you know what, maybe we'll have some allowances at home and not be so overly protective with our kids.
Well, talk about what your first meet with Nick and what you guys discussed with him in terms of the character. What kind of basically background you gave him?
Well, one thing was that we were very lucky that Nick said yes, because he's the only person that could have played that role. Honestly, we said to ourselves, this is a really tough character in the sense that it's a dad with a lot of rules as he's bringing up, and it can be kind of unlikable. And with Nick's voice, it always made him, no matter how much he was telling Eep and how much he's telling those guys to behave, you like him. You like Grug because you know his heart's in the right place. And in animation, that's, it's rare that every frame of the film, his heart's in the right place. He's just in over his head. So that was the one thing when we first talked about, is just to be able to know we wanted Nick. We really were like, he was like, what do you want? We want Nick Cage,
Well, it was a great day. They all flew in to New Orleans. I had a meeting literally on an airplane because they had to get out before a storm came in. So there we all were on this tarmac in New Orleans on a plane, and then they showed me the drawings, and that immediately put the hook in. I loved the way the world looked. I loved the way the animals looked. And then I looked at Grug and I said, yeah, I could play that guy. I want to be that guy. He's a little scary, but he's not too scary. I like the way he's drawn. I think I want children to see me or hear my voice coming out of that body. So that's really what did it.
Because in first glance, they're all scary until you hear them talk. You know, like I like that fact that Eve seems to make time to shave her armpits in the movie, which I thought was really kind of nice that cave girls would do that. But I also like too that also this starts off with basically with the cave painting, which is a really sort of sweet motif too. And then talk about was that something you started with, or did you kind of find your way towards that?
It didn't come in right away, but we needed it for a couple of very, very important reasons. One of them, we just needed a lot of things to set up. One of the things, most important things being, we were working with a bunch of characters that looked pretty indestructible. They're really tough. In the opening sequence, we want to demonstrate what kind of an environment that they exist in naturally. So just going out to get breakfast is a full contact sport. And in this world, with these guys that are that robust and resilient, we wanted people to understand right away that they're mortal. So one of the first things we did was that little opening where Eep explains that all the neighbors are all dead, and these are the last guys left.
And to make that funny.
Yeah, and the funny thing about it, well, the interesting thing about it is that when you work on that kind of stuff with the crew, the crew always laughed. Like whenever we would screen the film internally, we always got a big laugh. It was one of the biggest laughs in the whole film, was just like that family getting stuck through with a mosquito nose. But when we first screened it for a test audience, no one laughed. It was absolutely silent. Like, oh my gosh, like we completely miscalculated.
Freaking out.
This is going to be a disaster. Well, the rest of the film came in and the film played very, very well. And afterwards, we were doing a little question and answer, try to did you understand the film, that kind of stuff. One of the first things that one of the kids answered, well, they've got to be careful, everybody's dead. They've got to be careful. And so that, we didn't realize that was really, we knew it so well and found it to be funny, but to an audience that is brand new to it, that's really sinking in as to how dangerous the world is. So that's one of the most important things that little sequence did for us.
Well, you're talking about the emotional colorations and things, Nick, but you talked about using sort of cartoon characters for real performances, using Gumby as your taking off point for Peggy Sue Got Married. So you've always found that kind of emotional, that yearning, fearless quality in these cartoon characters anyway, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. And I just, again, I like to recruit everything from my childhood, even from our conversation today. I don't know what's going to wind up in a movie or not wind up in a movie, but it almost becomes like a Rolodex of memories that I visualize, or sounds even, things my friends have said, or even something I saw in a TV commercial. Anything could come back to me, and in the process, Chris and Kirk will say, well, let's have another go with the take, and I'll do it as it's written, and then I'll try to pull something up. I'll try to pull something back from my imagination, from my memories, and and put it into the performance. So cartoons like Looney Tunes, you mentioned, that will come back. When I did Peggy Sue Got Married, I was the voice of Pokey, the claymation horse. He would talk like, next time, Gumby, use your own go-kart. And I said to myself, well, I want to talk like that in a movie because I wanted to make it difficult on myself and see if I can get away with it. And of course, I was almost fired. Francis Coppola was directing. He cooked everybody a big spaghetti dinner and talked TriStar out of not firing me. So I stayed on.
You actually did get fired. It's true.
They wanted to get me fired, but he had my back. And I didn't get fired. And now I'm very happy with the performance. I think when you watch the movie, it's insane, it's ridiculous, and it's wonderful.
But I mean, that's what.
Because nobody else would do it, so I have to do it.
But that's just it. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Which is why I'm so struck by this character, because in almost every character you played, even these dads, there's kind of at some point they throw themselves into something. There's a fearlessness. There's like this sort of thing where they're sort of like they're following this light to adventure. And he's almost never that. I mean, this is a real different portrayal. You can hear it in the vocalization.
Thank you. Well, I cared about him. You know, I cared about Grug. I cared about the whole family. In a lot of ways, to me, this is a movie about unconditional love. And that's something that's important to me. And so I think if I care about the character I'm playing, then I'm going to really try to give it something emotional and something truthful. So yeah, you have to work with people you trust. You know, you can't just, because it's not true that I'm fearless. I'm very scared. It wouldn't be brave if I wasn't scared. I get scared, like I get an idea, and I go, boy, I sure hope I can make this work, you know, and then I have to face my fear and go into it.
But you dare yourself to do it, basically.
I dare myself to do it, yeah.
And this feels too like it because so much animation now is based on other material. I mean, some of it is using some book or something else. And to take on something like this gave you a chance to, because there's a whole generation of kids who grew up playing with prehistoric toys or dinosaurs who haven't really had a chance to see this in a movie. That must have been part of the thrill for you guys too, wasn't it?
Well, for us, we were just so excited to be like, because this was the first time we could do actually CG cavemen. You know, we grew up on the 2D. We love the Flintstones. We love, you know, the Quest for Fire movies, you know, on the other side. But this is a chance to do CG cavemen and watch them at speeds that, you know, you could never see human actors work at. That was
just that whole sequence of them running for the food.
Exactly.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah, I was trying to get them to be like in every single character, we put a signature into their animation. So like Grug would be more like a silverback gorilla, and Eep would be more like a jaguar. And so they all had these kind of animal like signatures to grace notes that they would use throughout the whole thing, and that gave them sort of a new language that we hadn't seen with animated humans.
But the other thing I was really aware of too is that the ground, because that's not something that's usually an issue, especially in CG, because you're still trying to believe that they really have weight. But these characters are constantly bouncing off the ground and running on things, and that certainly goes back to Warner's animation, that kind of sense of speed. But also they feel really grounded in a way that animation often doesn't.
Yeah, that's really the miracle of a great animator is being able to make that happen. We take it for granted because the animators that we work with are so skilled in what they do. But imagine sitting there with like a computer has no idea about weight, mass, anything like that, and you have to make like by hand, you know, a couple frames at a time, get these guys to hit a rock and feel like there's weight and follow through. And then there's a whole other team of people that will follow them up and make the clothing react in the right time to feel like the clothing has weight and the hair has weight and stuff like that. And it's an incredible illusion. It really is. I mean, one of the things I believe with CG animation is that you watch it differently than you would traditional animation. I think you watch it differently. I think there's a part of you that watches it more like a live action film. I experienced that the first time I saw a CG film, and I thought, I'm engaged in a way that I was not I wouldn't have been if this had been a traditionally animated film. It was a little sequence I was watching where there was a character doing something that was rather tedious, and if it had been a traditionally animated film, I think I would just be like, oh my gosh, I'm so bored. Move on. But I wasn't. Like I was absolutely riveted seeing this character doing this thing, and I thought, I'm watching this at a different level with a different part of my brain. And I think that like when these modern CG films, they are so immersive. I mean, they really are. Like, I believe these characters are real. Like, you look at them on screen and you're like, how can that only be like one pixel deep? I believe there's flesh and blood and a heart and a brain in these guys, and I absolutely believe in them. And it's, I think, just the skill of the animators that can get that sort of movement out of them.
I also feel that it should be noted that when I saw the movie for the first time, there were some moves that Grug was making where I thought, wow, these animators must have done an enormous amount of research, gone through all the movies that I've made, because it was the body language that I was familiar with. It was like, I remember doing that in Leaving Las Vegas. Now I'm doing it in the Croods, you know?
But it's right, there's a lot of the head movements are very Nick Cage.
Do you remember when he's petting the big saber-toothed cat and his hand's like hovering above the body of the cat? He's not sure, should I touch it or should I pet it or not? It was like in Leaving Las Vegas with Elizabeth Shue, where my hand is up above her back, and do I want to fall in love or don't I want to fall in love? And then I fall in love.
And it's just as dangerous, so it's kind of perfect. But one of the things that, and I bring this up, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Nick, is that the sense of gravity is really crucial to this. I mean, it's got to feel like your physics are involved in this, because often in animation, despite the fact that the textures look so real and everything, at a certain point, they're going to do something that's kind of fantastical. And what happens here is, I was always aware of how close these characters were to the ground, and that just even starting with that sequence of they're plowing through the entire planet looking for food, just the fact that they're in contact with the ground seems to be really crucial to this in a way that hasn't been in many other animated films I've seen.
You know, and the other thing that's interesting about this movie we hadn't thought about when we started, but the entire film is an exterior shot. Even the interior is an exterior. In the cave, there's dust, there's dirt.
And there's sunlight,
yeah, there's sunlight, and so the guys who came in our visual effects teams that actually do all of that work, that put that particulate matter in the air and add that, which gives it that verisimilitude, but gives it that kind of real feeling. You know, we would go through shot by shot and they would keep on plussing things. And the other part we did, and this is working with Roger Deakins, who's our visual consultant, and really to get this handheld camera feel and to put the camera on the ground with the characters. And so it's never that you're watching them, you're actually with them, more like a documentary of a nature show.
Well, that first shot of him going out of the cave, and we see the back of his hair, that's very much like an animal documentary, watching an ape come out of a cave or something.
I also like the time the movie takes. There's moments where no one's saying anything, and then the scenes have a chance to breathe a little bit, which I thought was very original to the Croods in particular, versus other animated features that I've seen.
I think what you're talking about is that sense of sort of like watching the way characters inhabit a room together. We're always a sense of, despite this in the great outdoors, that there's a lot of sort of tension. It's almost claustrophobic because everybody's on top of each other all the time. So using those two things is a really wonderful contrast.
But when an ape sees the sun for the first time, the time the movie takes to let her take it in and to climb on those rocks and feel it, that was interesting to me. And then also when Grug towards the end understands follow the light, and the time, there's no dialogue there. You actually see these characters take a beat and take it all in, which to me is a great thing to do. I get a little tired of movies where it's like slapdash, cut, slap. You don't let the scenes breathe very often. And Walter Hill was a master of letting scenes breathe. If you look at the one he did with Bronson in New Orleans.
Oh, sure, Hard Times.
Hard Times, it's all like one shot, and it's all like almost like watching a play. I felt a little bit like that with the Croods.
Well, that sense too, just so reacting to our face, which you guys do a lot. We get a chance to react to the faces a lot. And it's like the more we see the movie, the more subtly expressive the characters becomes. Like they start with really big expressions at the beginning, and by halfway into it, everything's become much subtler.
You know, one thing about animation versus live action, which we talk about that people know, because we spent 4 years making these movies, so actors have to become very patient with us redoing our scenes over
4
and over.
years?
Yeah, 4 years making these. But the one place where it does let the scenes breathe is we bring in our composer, Alan Silvestri, on this picture, came in very early. He watched storyboards with us that most people would sit there patiently watching them, and we would say, this is an area that we want score. We need to get this across. Can you build us something here? He goes, don't worry, I can take care of that. And so we built these little homes so we could have that, but he was already there, sort of like a co-writer, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we build from the very beginning these moments, and really we place them at pivot points, because music, I think, is the closest thing to real magic you can get. And the moment in the film where the Croods climb that tree and they look at the starry night sky for the first time, and at that point, they're never going to go back in the cave again. And so that's a huge turning point, and we clear that away and just let music do the talking for us. It's the best thing you can do. It's unassailable, and it just works. It just works.
It's also giving me
magic.
my feeling just about how important the ground is, because when they go up into the tree, it's a different movie. I mean, it just sort of takes on a different texture. Did you see a lot of the early storyboards as well, Nick? Did you look at any of that stuff?
I mean, they would show me what they were working on. It was kind of almost like a flip book when you go through that sort of stage of animation, and I would see it. And they would give me an idea of where they wanted to go. You know, when I make a movie like this, I don't look at the dialogue the night before. I don't want to. I want to be as fresh as possible, and I want to just be as spontaneous as possible. And I'll ask Chris and Kirk, well, where is he at right now? Is he angry? Is he sarcastic? Is he at at his lowest point, or is he more positive? And then they give it to me, and that to me that makes it makes kind of like an electricity in the performance. It's spontaneous and fresh. One of the things I do want to say about the length of the process, which I really love, when I'm not involved in feature films and I'm taking time off in between, I'll get a call. It's time to report for duty on the Croods. So if I'm in somewhere, wherever we are, all over the world, wherever we are, I'll go there and I'll record. But what it does is because you're in this sort of like a little, almost like it feels like a box, and there's a microphone, and everybody at DreamWorks is sort of watching, so pressure's on, and then but you have to go within and again recruit your imagination and your dreams or whatever it is that gives you that emotional content we talked about. It keeps my instrument, meaning myself, in shape. So it keeps me in tune, so that when I do have to go to work on another movie, a feature film, I know I still got it. You know what I mean? So that's what I love about the process. And I know Chris Rock made a joke that it's not that easy, because you've got to believe these other characters are in the room with you, in the cave with you in this case. You got to believe those animals are with you, so it keeps your imagination fertile.
How much of the character did you guys start to sculpt once you got Nick cast? I mean, I'm wondering if some of that started to change once he got involved and you started to get these readings from him.
Yeah, absolutely. We did make plans based on the hope that he was going to say yes when it came to the writing. We were writing for Nick from the very, very beginning. Once Nick said yes, then we definitely have time to do some customization to the character, and all the way to the end. I mean, we always use video cameras while we record on the off chance that there's something physical that we want to bring back to the animators. And so we'll bring these things back, and like sometimes during a take we might just circle something on the script and like, let's bring that back to the animator for them to see, because that was really, really cool. Yeah, like the release of the baby was a perfect one.
Perfect.
We thought that was just a little like release the baby, whatever. And when Nick did it, it was like, oh, wow, that's a moment now. Yeah. But the thing about animation,
A more quiet version could work too. Release the baby. That could also work. We should try that next time. These are the best two to work for, because they make you so confident. They love to laugh, and you feel so good when you hit something and it works, and then you see their reactions. They're covering their mouths, trying to. You feel so great, So it really galvanizes, I think, all of the actors.
Is that the crucial difference for you between doing a live action film and a feature film? Is you get a chance to really sort of read the directors as compared to...
Yeah, actually, that's a good point you bring up, because they're in the room with you. So many people now, so many filmmakers like to hide behind a monitor and watch playback. With the exception of Chris and Kirk and maybe Werner Herzog, the director isn't on the set anymore. And I used to like it when they were right there with you, and they're right there with me.
Because I'm wondering, too, in terms of, you were talking about the music, and I just wondered because music takes a different presence in the last third of the film. It becomes a real partner, and because you're really using it for kind of highlights before that. And I want to have you guys talk a little bit about that, how it becomes a fully realized part of it.
Well, this is the great part of having Alan from day one, having not only Alan there from day one, but also having our sound designers from Skywalker there, because we had to build a world with all the sounds coming in, and all those creature sounds. And so Alan could like sort of lay the pipe knowing where he needed to make the big, the event in the third act, to make that stuff resonant in the third act when it really starts to kick in. He's lacing those themes in from the very beginning, and we would make space for them, and we always knew where they were, and we'd get a couple of those very early and put them into the storyboards and put them into the animatic. So that's a process, again, that he's part of. Like, that's the one thing about animation, like, when Nick comes when we get to go record Nick, we're allowed to open up that mic and just stay and play, and we come back with more stuff than we showed up with. We come back with lines, we whole scenes. We're like, oh, we're going to drive there and make that work. So it's a much more collaborative process in the way it works. It's like everybody's got a hand in it, and so we're just really just along for the ride, making sure it all tracks with the story, and just inviting collaboration from everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to note, is that whenever you start one of these films, you begin by just like piling up a bunch of material and you push it along every day, like, I think this can work, yeah, let's do this, and push it along. And after a while, this whole thing starts to roll along a little bit more easily, more easily. But somewhere between the beginning and the end, it takes on a life of its own. And now you find yourself running alongside this thing and giving it what it needs. And it will reject, the movie itself will reject things and accept things. And part of that process is every single time we would record, we would come out with a slightly different movie or a very different movie. Directions change in these recording sessions because we're talking about the story. We come in, we talk about where the story is, we talk about where it's going, and right there we'll collaborate, maybe change some things, record things that we didn't expect to. When we come back to the studio, it's a different movie. And so now you're adding things to this movie, and it's going to change direction, and you're just running alongside it now. And it becomes a thing that will pull you all the way through the end at a certain point. And they'll come back, like, the movie doesn't want that. The movie said no, can't put that up. It's not going to work.
So it's what this collaborative thing you're talking about. It makes it a living thing in a way that movies aren't, doesn't it?
The collaboration?
Yeah.
It's a process that's very fluid. It's like a shapeshifter. You're sculpting as you go, and you're changing as you go. And I'm very thankful because, I do like to improvise, and I do like to come up with things to attach to a scene that makes sense to me in some way as a result of what's been written. And, both Chris and Kirk are very open to that, and in fact encourage that.
Well, we're out of time. Let's thank Chris and Kirk and Nick for being with us today.
Thank you.